Welcome to our plenary session on climate change and equality, the role of credit unions to make clean energy accessible and affordable. I'm Neda Arabshahi, Director of the Inclusiv Center for Resiliency and Clean Energy, and I'll be the moderator for our session this afternoon. As we get started, we just have a quick poll question that should pop up on your screen momentarily. Okay, and while you're answering the poll question, I'll share a bit more about the topic and the panelists. Today, we'll discuss how credit unions are uniquely positioned to develop and deploy climate-friendly financial products that support capacity and access to clean energy solutions for consumers, homeowners, and businesses in low-income minority communities. We have the pleasure of being joined by our panelists, Marilyn, Waite, Greg Milne, and Tom Kurian. So as you may have heard, climate action is now a fundamental part of Inclusiv's work. It being a record year for disasters such as hurricanes and wildfires, the impact of climate change has been felt severely, particularly in low-income communities and communities of color. And the need for climate action is pressing. With that, credit unions have the opportunity to really make an impact through climate-friendly lending programs in their communities. Inclusiv's new Center for Resiliency and Clean Energy was created in partnership with the Center for Impact Finance at the University of New Hampshire and with the Hewlett Foundation. Together, we're building a network of community-based financial institutions that are committed to designing and scaling affordable clean energy lending solutions, particularly in low-income communities and communities of color. As part of this work, we are providing training and tools to help credit unions implement green loan programs. Today, we're thrilled to announce the launch of our new Solar Lending Professional Training and Certificate Program. This will be a virtual program that will be available free of charge for community-based lenders, and you should be able to see a link for where you can go to apply for the course in the chat. We'll be offering the course multiple times in 2021, and we hope that you join us. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists. Marilyn Waite is a program officer in environment at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. She manages the foundation's grant making on climate and clean energy finance with the ambitious goal of addressing climate change by accelerating the transition to a climate-friendly economy. Marilyn has worked across 4 continents in venture investment, startups, and low carbon energy. And she has led several operational research and development projects at Arriva in France. She is the author of Sustainability at Work. Next, we have Greg Milne, who is the Chief Impact and Foreign Policy Officer at the Clinton Foundation. In this role, he oversees the foundation's efforts on programmatic impact and evaluation metrics and information sharing. He also helps guide international strategy and plays a central role in shaping and executing President Clinton's foreign policy vision for the foundation. Previously, he served as the Deputy Chief of Staff and Director of Policy to President Clinton and Chief Executive Officer of the Clinton Foundation's Haiti program. Next, we have Tom Kurian, who is the Vice President of Enterprise Information Security at the United Nations Federal Credit Union, and is the UNFCU Global Sustainability Program Manager leading the credit union industry team. Through its flagship effort, the United in Sustainability Network, UNFCU seeks to establish credit unions as authentic, values-based leaders in the financial services sector. Tom works with credit union suppliers, and industry groups to amplify our collective impact through community and collaboration. And he's a certified sustainability practitioner. Now, to get a better sense of who's in the audience, we'd love to take a look at the poll results. Okay, great. So it looks like we have a pretty good mix of institutions that are offering green deposits, energy efficiency lending, solar lending for consumers, solar for businesses, electric vehicles, and other green products. And then we also see that about half of the audience is not offering green products. So thank you so much for taking the time to answer that question. We just thought it would be great to have a sense of what the different audience members have experienced with this topic. Okay, so let's keep going. Now I'm going to pass it over to Marilyn Waite. She's going to share more about her work at the Hewlett Foundation.
Thank you so much, Neda. Pleasure to be here. Just waiting on the slides to pop up. And I don't think I can control it. If I can, yes, okay. Well, thanks so much for having me again. I will quickly go through these slides so we can get into the Q&A. We've all experienced all that is 2020 so far, and so the climate impacts are definitely among us with hurricanes, wildfires, or climate-induced and ever-exacerbating wildfires, and so on. And so this is an image that comes from 2019, though we have similar images from this year of wreckage from hurricanes. So in order to avert the worst impacts of climate change, we have to reduce by at least 60% the net emissions, greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And that's to keep the planet well below 2 degrees Celsius. Next slide, please. To do so, of course, requires capital. And so here's what we know. We know that we are currently investing about $500 billion US annually and globally into climate solutions. So that's anything that's mitigating climate change across transportation, energy, buildings, agriculture. And we know we need at least 1.6 trillion globally and annually to keep warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. So that's the gap. Next slide. The good news is that we do have the capital already available. This image shows the capital intensity and risk tolerance of different pools of capital. These are global numbers, and we've tried not to double count here, which is why you see bank deposits is a little bit less than asset ownership. If we were to use bank assets, that would be the biggest bubble on this graph. So starting with the most risk tolerant form of capital, venture capital, to private equity, to the public financing institutions, the multilateral development banks, to, of course, the largest pools of capital available, which are mostly private, asset ownership, primarily pension funds, insurance companies, and mutual funds, and banks through the lending and credit capabilities, and that's the deposits. So we're focusing in on this for the purposes of this discussion. But we have over 100 trillion sitting there in these bank deposits. So we have more than enough capital for this transition. Next slide, please. Now, how is that capital leveraged? We know that for every dollar that's a deposit in a bank, it's leveraged by at least 10 to 1, if not sometimes 20 to 1. So high leverage globally. And that is being currently leveraged to exacerbate climate change. So here we have some of the biggest financiers of the climate crisis. And as you can see, I assume we're mostly a US-based audience here. It's mostly the US banks, and particularly banks with a huge retail arm. And so in order to avert this, the worst of the climate crisis, we really do have to mitigate. So to move away from the financing of not just fossil fuels, but all of the heavy emitting activities towards the green, towards the carbon reducing activities. Next slide, please. Back to some good news. The good news is that people are powerful and institutions are hungry for retail customers. We have a number of institutions that have never been involved in the retail banking side of things that have gone after the core deposit market in the United States and virtual banks. And so using that as leverage is one thing we can do to drive this action. We know that there's overwhelming support among consumers, including millennials, for climate action. Next slide, please. So this is just a really brief taste of some of what we're doing. We, of course, are supporting Inclusiv's new Clean Energy and Resiliency Center, supporting credit unions generally. We also help support the Clean Energy Federal Credit Union, so a relatively new credit union in the United States dedicated solely to clean energy lending, including energy efficiency, electric vehicles, and solar and other products that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're also supporting a campaign called Bank for Good. So you can go to bankforgood.org, and that is a coalition of banks and credit unions across the country that have agreed to not finance the climate crisis, but to finance the climate solution and the opportunity that creates for jobs and the economy. So please check that campaign out. It recently launched. And then we're also supporting something called the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, or PCAF. And a number of institutions, small and large, are now a part of this. And this is harmonizing the approach to measure and disclose and reduce the carbon emissions, not of a bank branch's physical location, but of the actual core business of a bank or lending institution, which is to lend and provide investments. So this gives you an example. We're doing a lot more. We're focusing on all the pools of capital that I mentioned on the graph earlier, but this gives you a flavor of some of the things that we're doing, especially on the lending and banking side. Next slide, please. And feel free to reach out to me should you have any questions. And I know that Neda will be asking some later on. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marilyn. So now I'm going to pass it over to Greg to share a bit more about the Clinton Foundation's work.
Thanks so much, Neda, and thanks for inviting me to be here with you today. Really looking forward to this conversation because I think it brings together both the work that President Clinton started during his administration supporting underserved communities through government action like the creation of the CDFI fund, new market tax credits and empowerment zones, as well as the work that the Clinton Foundation has been doing over the past several years, mainly internationally, but inclusive of Puerto Rico and USVI, to solarize critical facilities such as schools, medical centers, community institutions, etc. The work that we're doing with you now and other partners really brings these two work streams together in the mainland US, and it's especially timely because we're having this discussion when renewable energy investments are more critical than ever for communities, small businesses, and households who are also grappling with the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And while we all know the challenges certainly still exist, I think we're at a point where a number of factors are coming together to help drive the opportunities for large-scale renewable energy penetration, accompanied by inclusive financing options. So in particular, what we've been seeing is the cost of solar panels and batteries continues to fall. But at the same time, as Marilyn said, climatic events such as increased frequency and severity of hurricanes and the devastating wildfires out west are proving, I think, even more forcefully the need for renewables and the greater resiliency they provide. Cities across the country are also really stepping up. Places like Hartford and Oakland are putting in place inclusive and ambitious programs to support greater deployment of renewable energy, as well as energy retrofits and support for companies in their communities that are focused on green products and solutions. At the Clinton Foundation, we don't think there's a question any longer about the importance of renewables and helping to support healthier and more resilient communities. Now we really feel the onus is on all of us to remove the financial barriers to make these products and approaches more available and inclusive. Thanks to Inclusiv and many of you, effective models have already been developed and are showing proven results. So again, I think now it comes to a matter of scale and replication that we really need to focus on. I think we also feel that this is a space that lends itself to innovative partnerships and financing structures, and we think it's imperative to consider PPP arrangements as well as to work across sectors and industries. And again, I think this partnership model is especially relevant now as we're seeing the dual impacts of the COVID pandemic and more frequent natural disasters and the additional financial strain that that's putting on cities, small businesses, and community-based financial institutions. So lastly, the common thread in all of our climate work has really been a focus on communities and partnering with communities to best understand their needs and to design comprehensive programs and approaches that not only include, but really properly engage communities and empower them to make decisions about their energy and financial futures. So again, thanks for having me and looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Greg. And now I'm going to pass it over to Tom to share more about the UN Federal Credit Union's work.
Thank you, Neda. And thank you everybody for attending the session. As we're talking about clean energy lending and climate impacts and the opportunities that credit unions have, I think it's really important that UNFCU and through our United Sustainability Network, that credit unions really model, not only talk about the product side, but actually model the behavior that we're trying to encourage in the communities in which we're operating. And it's interesting, I was watching the video, I was happy to see Clearwater Credit Union there because they're actually part of our network too, and some of the work they're doing, it's really great to see them kind of taking action within their own facilities, bringing solar to their own branches. Because at UNFCU, what we began to realize is that the credit union industry is really perfectly positioned to take the lead here in terms of sustainability. And, looking at the slides that Marilyn was putting up, you could see that, the large for-profit institutions, they're deeply committed to some kind of fossil investing. And, we believe that credit unions are really in an authentic place. As the United Nations Fellow Credit Union, we, of course, align our sustainability efforts to the UN, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we've seen for a long time that, responsible communities and responsible economic growth, those are, SDGs that have been always true within the credit union DNA, always true to credit unions and how we've operated. And we see sustainability as a real differentiator, a real ability to set ourselves apart from fancy fintechs, from large financial for-profit banks, and really claim this, especially since credit unions already have within the way we typically collaborate, that this kind of amplification of our impact when we are united is already just how we've always been operating. You come to conferences like this, even when they used to be in-person conferences, we would be always sharing best practices, incubating ideas that we've incubated within our own institutions and sharing them and injecting them into the credit union space. That, I think, is fairly unique to the credit union industry, and we want to keep amplifying that. So I'll talk very quickly about UNFCU. We started our official global sustainability program back in 2015. That was our real formalization of our efforts within our institution to really have best practice based transparency and around sustainability. We had some kind of smaller ground up initiatives, but we really made this kind of a core value part of the way, kind of the core mission, the core values of our organization. By 2017, we were a climate neutral organization. We're committed to always being climate neutral. But what we began to see is that we really wanted to influence and have greater impact beyond just our own operations. That started initially with kind of working with our suppliers. We know our supplier base is a huge part of our sustainability impact. It's where, we like to say that, where if you want to see an organization's value, show me their budget, right? So we started talking about where we're reallocating our resources. But we also wanted to, introduce some of these ideas we were working on into the credit union industry. And we started back in 2018, our first United in Sustainability Summit. And in fact, our nexus there, we're up to our third United in Sustainability Summit. That's actually going to be occurring tomorrow, Thursday and Friday. I think you'll have a link to the registration and the information around the United in Sustainability Summit in the chat. We encourage everyone who's listening and watching this, to sign up, take part of that. Because what we found was that within the credit union space, these are big topics. These are big topics to deal with. Sometimes it can be difficult to know how to begin to engage with them. And what we've seen is that there is a lot of good work, and there's a lot of good work that credit unions can share, like Clearwater, like what Inclusiv is doing with this new program, that credit unions may want to engage with. We saw about 57% of the people who responded to the poll don't have a green product yet, right? So if they know about the rails, the kind of infrastructure that's being built out, maybe they can begin to engage with these topics. And of course, sustainability is broader than just climate action. We'll definitely be having at our summit, we'll also be talking about, we'll have some presenters. Obviously, we have Kathy from Inclusiv, CEO of Inclusiv, leading a panel on green products, but we'll also have speakers from Filene's on diversity, equity, inclusion. We'll co-hosting this year with organization, American States FCU, Federal Credit Union. With their relationship with National Geographic, we have some incredible, interesting artists presenting to help inspire our industry. So I think we really, at UNFCU and the United Sustainability Network, which is our effort to engage this entire credit union industry, we believe that sustainability is core to who we are, a competitive advantage, and the collaboration and the rising of all boats that is inherent to the credit union industry before we really start even thinking about sustainability really can amplify and multiply our impact, and in the minds of our of our members, of our potential members, our staff, our stakeholders, can really set us apart.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to Tom, Greg, and Marilyn for providing the background on your organizations and your work. Now we'll open it up for a few questions. We have some questions prepared, and folks in the audience, if you'd like to submit questions, please do so in the Q&A box. So we'll start with Marilyn. So Marilyn, as we saw in 2020, community-based financial institutions were really able to spring into action to support their members who were seeking PPP loans during COVID-19. These institutions are well positioned to provide support on the ground when climate change-related disasters impact their communities as well. So what can they do right now to start to be prepared for that, to be creating more resilient communities as they start to experience the threats of climate change?
I think what's really unique about the credit union system, there are over 5,000 credit unions, and they are embedded in communities, in real places with real economies, working with both residential consumers and also small businesses, which is the backbone of the economy, as we see in terms of the kind of real output. And so there are lots of different loan products that can be implemented, as you had in your polling. That includes solar, rooftop solar, community solar. It includes ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. It includes electric vehicles, especially we have data now that shows that there are much lower defaults to EV loans compared to internal combustion engine loans. If you could provide a more attractive interest rate for the consumers for those. You can also have a whole suite of energy efficiency lending, from weatherization products to all kinds of energy efficiency equipment. So there's a suite of interventions and loan products that help both households and businesses to improve their own bottom line, right? Their own energy outcomes and their own financial bottom line, and also the planet, right? They're all of those things are mitigating carbon dioxide, which are making communities safer in terms of air pollution, more resilient, and what have you. So I think that list that you put up in the beginning was quite good. And there's other things like the heat pumps and other products that can be incorporated. Have a look at the Clean Energy Credit Union's list of products, and they're selling loan participations as an example. But also there are lots of peers that are out there doing this lending. And I'll give a shout out to Inclusiv, to the new solar lending training that's happening, which you can take advantage of to learn more about doing this type of loans.
Great, thank you. And we actually had a follow-up question. Do you have data on default rates for EV loans? Or I don't know if anyone does on the panel, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I can partially answer that. So there will be, in terms of published studies, there will be a few that I know coming out in 2021. They are not out yet, but there's a few academic institutions that are doing some research on that. There may be, however, some preliminary reports already available that we can look into. And I believe that one of the partners you have, University of New Hampshire, they may have some data preliminarily on some of those, lending portfolios. What we do know is that this asset class of climate-friendly lending, clean energy lending, and energy efficiency, but not just that, also in the agriculture space, small small business loans for converting farmland to organic, which sequesters 25% more carbon. All of that we know is creating more diversification in the credit union system. So for those credit unions that, for example, were overweight in taxi medallion lending, those kinds of small business transactions now have an opportunity to add this to the portfolio, create more diversification, and therefore more portfolio resiliency.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, great. And so I'm just checking. We'll go to the next question, and then we'll also check on the Q&A in a moment. But Greg, if you could please speak about some of the specific ways in which adding clean energy loan programs can benefit low-income communities and communities of color. I know you touched on this a bit in your introduction, but if you could expand on that.
Yeah, thanks again, Neda. I think I just want to kind of set the stage quickly for the urgency of this work. You know, I've jotted down some stats that people are probably familiar with, but just stick with me. You know, to state the obvious, dirty energy has a negative health impact on everyone, but especially felt by low-income communities and communities of color. You know, there was a 2017 report by the NAACP and the Clean Air Task Force that showed that Black Americans breathe air that is 50% more polluted than non-Black Americans. And the same report found that fence line zones around hazardous facilities are disproportionately Black, Latino, and impoverished, and that Black Americans are 75% more likely than other Americans to live in these fence line communities. So when you take that and then also look at some of the evidence in cities like Detroit, Baltimore, San Jose, where low-income households spend 3 times as large a share of their income on energy costs as other households. And when you see as our organizations have the impact that Hurricanes Irma and Maria had in Puerto Rico, causing the longest blackout in US history and leaving many communities living without power for over 6 months. You know, we quickly see the collective challenges that we need to address. But I think the good news, to get to your question, is that clean energy programs and investments provide solutions to many of these inequities by reducing the cost of energy and making it more accessible. So in addition to the really important work that you and the center are doing, a couple other concrete examples. Here in New York, where I'm based, Block Power is a Brooklyn-based energy technology startup that since its founding in 2012 has completed energy projects in nearly 1,000 buildings across New York City. The company was started by a great young entrepreneur, Donnell Baird, who is part of the Clean Global Initiative University program. And basically through their work, Block Power are typically saving their clients between 20 and 40% on their energy costs annually, while significantly reducing GHG emissions and improving air quality in many of these communities in New York, including the Bronx, where I believe it's still the highest rates of asthma in the United States. And I think what's so effective about their work is their ability to work with homeowners, community groups, churches, and others to identify the specific needs of the communities, and then to, through their relationship with city and state agencies, realize tax savings and other incentives that are available to folks for many of these projects. One other example I just wanted to put out there, returning to Puerto Rico, is our friends at Direct Relief and the Puerto Rico Primary Care Association. Working with them, we have been solarizing the federally qualified health centers in Puerto Rico. And again, as many folks probably know, these FQHCs are really pillars of the community and provide frontline health care for underserved populations in all 50 states and the US territories. In Puerto Rico, due to the damage primarily from Hurricane Maria, many of the federally qualified health centers were without power for days or even weeks during a time of really true crisis. And almost all of them lost tens of thousands of dollars worth of insulin and other prescription drugs that require refrigeration. So with the solar and storage now added to these critical facilities, they're able to continue operating in post-disaster situations, which sadly we saw earlier this year when an earthquake hit the south of the island. But also perhaps equally importantly, these federally qualified health centers are realizing approximately 100,000 in energy savings annually from the solar and storage, which obviously they can then put towards operating costs, patient care, et cetera. And I'm happy to say that Direct Relief is now taking this model to California, where there are over 1,500 FQHCs embedded in communities throughout the state. So really great model, and I think good things happening in that space.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I think we have time for one more question. I also want to note that I think we're going to put up a slide, and also you'll be able to see in the chat links to our a survey that we're conducting, asking credit unions to tell us more about their green products, and then also the link to sign up for or apply for our free solar lending training program. And we'll have two tracks for that program. We'll have a track for commercial lending, and we'll have a track for consumer lending. So we'd love for you to participate in both of those. And then I'll also mention that in the Q&A, we're seeing a few questions that are about, one is there a resource to see what the green product's useful life really is as an asset so we can develop depreciation estimates to lend on? Another is about how do we educate members on green products? I think for both of those are the types of questions that the Center for Resiliency and Clean Energy is really working on providing our members with really concrete tools. Some of those are these that are going to be covered in the solar lending training program that we're offering. So more to come on that. But the last question that I'll pose to Tom is, beyond just moral imperative, can you please speak about the top and bottom line benefits to sustainability?
Absolutely. I'm just looking at the chat and seeing, like, you can see right there with some of the information that Kathy's sharing and a lot of the other attendees are sharing on the kind of health of these products. Obviously, we want to do well and we want to do good, but we also have to, have to make good business sense as well. And the top line benefits have already been sort of laid out, I think, by some of the other panelists and some of the work that Inclusiv is doing. But, being sustainable, not only does it have these kind of opportunities for new revenue side, new products, some of the operational benefits you'll have on cost reduction and coming from like paper use reduction at UNFCU. We've had dramatic paper use reduction savings in hundreds of thousands of dollars. You'd be surprised once you engage in sustainability and are serious about, setting objectives and measuring and tracking your progress. As we say at UNFCU, if you measure it, you usually improve, right? So we were looking at and challenging ourselves on why are we doing things as simple as election ballots for our board of directors. Why not make that move away from paper? Six-figure savings for us. I mean, we're a large credit union, but still six-figure savings, unbelievable. But then we've reduced paper use across our organization. Of course, energy reduction. These things really we have to have not only be responsible organizations, but be responsible and healthy financial institutions. Sustainability is an opportunity to both, and even on the soft costs, to engage and connect with those kinds of communities, especially younger millennials and Gen Z. Huge climate change is a huge effort, huge importance to them. But we do have to make sure that we get also, and we will see these benefits by just doing reduction and measuring and really challenging ourselves in our own operations to see if our use our consumption is really valid and are there better, more innovative ways for us to operate as institutions? And then share that through, like if you go to UNFCU's own website, through our impact report, sharing that and letting our members connect, and letting our stakeholders connect with the work we're doing in our organizations. I think that's something that we're really focused on at UNFCU and through our United Sustainability Network, helping credit unions learn how to engage with tools like you have and at Inclusiv, and also how to communicate this value out to the different groups of stakeholders we have.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to our panelists, Tom, Greg, and Marilyn. We really appreciate hearing about the great work that you've been doing. And I'm going to pass it over to Pablo.
Thank you, Neda, and thank you all, Marilyn, Greg, and Tom. This conversation is so important. I mean, we have seen this year, you know, a record-setting number of hurricanes and tropical storms. We're seeing the fires on the West. So clearly, this is something that is affecting so many more people now. And unfortunately, many of those people are low-income people, minority communities. And that's where I think that, you know, our mission of community development and financial inclusion really overlaps with this imperative to fight climate change, you know. So this conversation is so close to what we all need to be focusing on. So I really appreciate your insight, and hopefully for everyone who's listening, you know, to understand that we all can do something. And that's the important thing, is that everything that we start, you know, it's, you know, a journey starts with a, you know, a first, you know, step, and that's the reality we do. So I wanted to commend Marilyn, you and the Hewlett Foundation, because you have been instrumental in our launching of our Center for Resiliency and Clean Energy. And that's really important. It's a different space for us, and it's a space that, again, should be part of our mission. So we appreciate that. With you, Greg, and the work that we have been doing with the Clinton Foundation, clearly there's so many overlaps, you know, CDFIs, you know, the rebuilding of Puerto Rico, but also all what we could be doing to strengthen communities and hopefully get them to become more resilient. And Tom, you know, with you and the United in Sustainability, clearly there's so many opportunities. There are synergies that we hope we can leverage with you. Together, we can engage many more credit unions in this work. So we are really, really grateful to the three of you for taking the time to participate in our conference. Really appreciate it. Now I'm going to move on to other items, but again, thank you so much. As you have seen throughout the day, we have been sharing a number of Vision 2020 videos with, you know, remarks from leaders, both within the industry, but also President Clinton's videos. And now I would like to introduce, maybe not introduce, but present to you Jim Nasser's remarks, and then we'll come back to comment on that. So just 1 second, please. Hopefully now.
Hello, friends from Inclusiv, and I'm happy to be able to join your annual conference remotely. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to make a brief presentation. I wanted to say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of every credit union's DNA. It's a building block of who we are, and I think it's a building block of everything we do. Credit unions were created to expand financial inclusion to underserved populations, starting with the Great Depression and all the way through the current pandemic that's really devastated so many of our most vulnerable communities. Credit unions have been there as the first financial responders, springing into action when things often look their worst, but being there to help individuals, families, small businesses, and communities get back on their feet. The roots of the credit union system have created really almost in an organic sort of way, an instinct to reach out, to make sure that all people are included. The challenge I believe we're now facing is how we lean in even further to those values, those principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really make a lasting difference, a critical difference at this historically critical time and for some very challenged and marginalized groups. NCUA Chairman Rodney Hood has said, I think quite eloquently, that financial inclusion is the civil rights issue of our time, and I could not agree more, and said as much at our most recent government affairs conference in Washington. Credit unions must focus on expanding financial inclusion and equitable service to underserved populations even more than we have throughout our history. This doesn't simply mean opening an account, too, by the way, or making sure that people have enough money to pay their bills with every paycheck. It's about providing them the tools, the resources that actually puts them on a path to ownership, to home ownership, to starting a business, to owning their destiny, possibly being able to send a child to college and continuing that path that is so important. Opportunities that may not exist if credit unions don't step in to fill that void. Here's the good news. We're not starting from scratch. We've got a lot of positive momentum throughout the credit union system. Credit unions locate a higher percentage of their branches in racially and ethnically diverse areas, certainly much more than banks, about 76% to 71% credit unions do that better. And there are 3 times as many minority depository institutions, MDI credit unions, than there are as banks. Now, MDI credit unions are a crucial part of our outreach, of course, to communities of color, ensuring that they have access to capital. 10% of credit unions are MDI credit unions, half of which are owned by our minority depository institutions, are Black owned. In this instance, credit unions have the most certified CDFI credit unions than any other institution type. And there are currently 324 CDFI credit unions nationwide. And they play such a crucial and important role in filling financial gaps for the underbanked communities of color, as well as low and moderate income communities across the country. The Treasury CDFI Fund recently announced awards totaling $45 million to 111 CDFI credit unions, including 13 first-time awardee credit unions. Several grants were awarded via the Native American CDFI Assistant Program, which works to expand financial offerings to Native American, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian communities. At CUNA, our commitment to advancing DEI, both internally for us as an organization, as well as for our entire credit union movement, shapes much of the work that we do. It's led certainly by all of our senior team, but particularly by our new Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Samira Salem. Our National CUNA Board adopted diversity, equity, and inclusion as the 8th shared cooperative principle on behalf of all of America's credit unions, and made a resolution in June to advance equitable service to Black communities. We're taking steps to improve DEI at CUNA's governance throughout all of our committee assignments and leadership assignments, and working to draw talent and advice from groups like the Network for Latino Credit Union Professionals, or the African American Credit Union Coalition, NOLCOP, AACUC, and others to find diverse talent and candidates to serve in leadership positions. Education is a key component to our work, of course, and our DEI e-school, available free to members, was tremendously successful. We averaged about 1,000 to 1,200 registrants for each one of the 4 webinars that we conducted. We're continuing to offer and expand DEI learning opportunities at all of our CUNA conferences and virtual events, as well as highlighting inspirational leaders within our credit union movement through our magazine articles and podcasts. Our commitment extends to system partners as well, including the Credit Union DEI Collective. We're proud to be a founding member of that collective. This is a group that many of you know. It's designed to share ideas, collaborate, support resources that encourage greater diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout our credit union movement. AACUC launched its Commitment to Change, Credit Unions United Against Racism initiative this year to focus on unification, education, and just conversations, investments that can be made in our credit union movement into the future, where diversity, equity, and inclusion certainly can thrive. We're currently in the process of creating an online community to be managed in partnership with the AACUC to foster an exchange of these ideas, more advice and feedback, and resources among credit union professionals. DEI principles are part of our advocacy work as well. We continue to demonstrate to policymakers that credit unions do serve so many diverse communities across the country and actually promote inclusiveness, financial inclusivity, and equity in the delivery of safe and affordable financial services. We're also an advocate on behalf of policies that benefit communities of color, including a recent bill passed by the House that would encourage federal deposits in minority depository institutions. As a movement, we've got our work cut out for us, no question, but we will bring an unparalleled combination, I believe, of commitment, skills, and dedication, as well as thought leadership to this problem. I'm confident that we will have what it takes to move forward. Groups like Inclusiv, you've been leading the way in transforming and progressing us forward to lasting change within the credit union movement. And I couldn't be prouder to be able to work with all of you. So thank you for the opportunity to be together with you today, virtually nonetheless, but I hope that you have a great rest of your conference. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Jim Nasser. And again, this is very consistent with the theme that we've been following throughout the conference. DEI, it should be part of our DNA, and it is. The 8 principle, being adopted by so many credit unions is an important step. Being this, financial inclusion being the civil right of our generation is to me something that we have to take seriously. It's a disgrace that in our country we have so many people who are outside the financial system. We have to change that. We are getting now ready for our last session. So one more plenary for everyone. So we're gonna go now into an intermission of 15 minutes. I know it's been a long day, but I wanna thank again our panelists, but everyone who has been participating throughout the day. It's been a long day, but hopefully it's been a day of inspiration, of learning, of sharing. 15 minutes break. Again, don't forget to go visit our exhibit hall, talk to our sponsors and exhibitors, and remember to come back. We have one more session coming up at 4:45 Eastern time. Thank you so much.